How's everybody doing? Good. Wanted to mention a couple things before we get started. The first one is, I think, if you've looked at the updated schedule for class, that you're going to have a take-home quiz Friday. So that actually is posted. It will be posted on Moodle. It should be available at 11 o'clock, so after class time today. And you'll have till 5 p.m. on Friday to finish that up. So just to write that down. So take-home quiz is available on Moodle at 11 a.m. today. And it'll be due Friday at 5 p.m. There is a Dropbox on Moodle for you to submit your assignment. So however you want to do that electronically is fine with me. I do ask that you use the Dropbox versus emailing it to me, since I've got all of my classes are submitting things electronically. It'll help me keep things organized by class. To save a little bit of space on things, or a little bit of ease of things, I think, if you could submit it as a PDF, that would be great. There's an app that I use. You can use whatever app you want or however you want to get it. I don't really care, but there's an app that I use called Cam Scanner. And you can take pictures with your phone and convert it to a PDF. You can combine multiple pages into one PDF. You can save it as black and white, which saves some room. But you can use whatever app or however you want to do it. If you're writing like I am, I have a Microsoft Surface that I'm writing on, where that's what I'm using to project things to you. So if you do it that way, I want to save it and send it to me, that's perfectly fine. Like I said, all I ask is that you use the Dropbox on Moodle so that I can keep the classes separate for what I'm collecting. The other thing is, for class time on Friday, what I'll do is I'm not going to lecture anything on Friday. I will just start the meeting at 10 o'clock. And if you want to drop in to ask questions about the take-home quiz, you're more than welcome to. So that's how I'll do class on Friday. So there won't be, and I'll send an email reminder out to everybody, because if you're doing fine on the take-home quiz and don't need to stop by to ask questions, that's perfectly fine. I don't mind one way or the other. But I will be here definitely during that time to answer questions about the take-home quiz if you have them. And of course, you should, just like usual, you should always feel free to reach out if you've got questions about anything at other times too. Any questions about that at all?
What all is the take-home quiz over?
Just the stuff that we talked about on Monday and talking about today. So the stuff that we did last time on the double angle formulas, and then what we're going to finish off with half angle formulas today. That's what the take-home quiz is over. So the half angle stuff is not on Hawks. So that's what we're doing it outside of Hawks, but the Hawks homework is also over what we talked about last time. So actually, the Hawks homework is over basically the problems that look like. Let me scroll back up here. All the Hawks problems are all like this one, this example, where it gives you some information about where an angle is and one of the trig values of that angle, and then asks you to find the sine or the cosine or the tangent of 2 times that angle. That's what I think there's only 5 problems on the Hawks homework.
I know there was like some the product identity or something like that on the Hawks too. So like, do we not go over those, or?
There shouldn't be any homework that's assigned on that. Was there homework that was assigned on that? I mean, it might be in the learn mode, but I don't think there shouldn't be any that are actually assigned on that, because we're not going to go over that. I will double check and make sure there's not anything that's assigned. You're right; it's definitely in the learn mode, but we're not covering those formulas.
Okay. Are you hosting office hours tomorrow?
Am I going to have office hours today? Oh, tomorrow? I can be available tomorrow. I will. Did you have a specific time that you wanted to talk, or did you are you free most times?
No, I just didn't know if you were supposed to be at the same time that you did yesterday.
I haven't made a decision on when I'm doing the rest of them. I'm going to do that today. I'm still waiting for feedback from people to see when they're available. But I'll send out an email today about when I'll have definite office hours. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, let's remind ourselves of what the formulas we were talking about yesterday, or Monday, I mean. So we had the double angle formula for sine. So we had 2 sine x cosine x. We had the double angle formula for tangent. Which was the 2 tangent x over 1 minus tangent squared x. And then for cosine of 2x, we actually had 3 of them. The first one we came up with was the cosine squared x minus sine squared x. And all 3 of these we generated by using the sum formulas for the different trig functions. And then we used a couple of Pythagorean identities to rearrange a couple of these. So we also had the 2 cosine squared x minus 1, and we had 1 minus 2 sine squared x. So those were the 3 different expansions for cosine of 2x, if you will. These last two, these two were the ones that we used to get the half angle formulas. So that was what we did right at the end of class last time, and came up with sine of x was plus or minus square root of 1 minus cosine 2x over 2. And cosine of x is plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine of 2x over 2. So those are the ones that we came up with right at the end of class last time. And these are the ones that we're going to focus on today to do some problems. Now, again, remember that what I mentioned last time, this isn't always plus or minus. These plus or minuses are made by the decisions made on which one you use, depending on which quadrant the x is in. Okay, so it's not always, you don't always write plus or minus. You have to pick. It's either a plus or it's a minus, and it depends on what quadrant the x is in. So let's see if we can do some examples that tell us about that. All right. So let's look at this first one, where we have sine of 15 degrees. So first thing we notice is that 15 is half of 30. Okay. So we're going to use the half angle formula. So if I do sine of 15 degrees, and I have to make I'm going to go ahead and write the plus or minus, but I have to make a decision on which one we're going to use here in a second. Is the square root of 1 minus cosine of, well, let's look, remember the formula has, let me just write it back up here again. Notice that this number, this x here, is half of this number here, right? This says x, this says 2x. So since I have 15 here, what's going to go inside the cosine here? 30, good, yeah. So we have 1 minus cosine of 30 degrees over 2. Now again, I have to make a decision here. I have to decide, do I want the plus or do I want the minus? That depends on this thing that's inside the sine function. So what we have to know, what quadrant is 15 degrees in? This is in quadrant 1. Good. So if it's in quadrant 1, do we want the plus or do we want the minus? We want the plus. Good. So we'll get rid of the minus. Good. All right. So this is going to be square root of 1 minus, and then we need cosine of 30 degrees. What's cosine of 30? Do you remember what cosine of 30 degrees is? Well, I think it's square root of 3 over 2, right? Yeah? Are we okay with this one? Yeah. All right, let's look at the next one. So the difference between this half angle formula for sine and the half angle formula for cosine, the only thing that's the difference is the sign here in the middle. So cosine of x is plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine of 2x over 2. So if I'm going to use the half angle formula here, again, I'm going to put the plus or minus out in front. We'll make the decision here in a second. Okay, again, notice that this angle, the number that's in here, is half of this one. Or, said another way, whatever's in here, I'm going to multiply it by 2 and put it in over here. So I have 7 pi over 12 here. What's going to go inside over here? 7 pi over 6. Good, because I'm going to multiply it by 2, right? Notice that that's what the formula says. Whatever's inside of here, I'm going to multiply it by 2 when I put it in over here. And then we'll have that all over 2. Okay. Now we need to make a decision on the quadrant. What quadrant is 7 pi over 12 in? Is it 3? Let's think about it for a sec. Yeah, what's up here? This is pi over 2, right? That's 6 pi over 12. If we multiply top and bottom by 6. So 7 pi over 12 must be over here. So this is in quadrant 2. So do we use the plus or the minus? The minus. Good. Yeah, we get rid of the positive. We want to use the minus on that one. And then the last thing we need to know to simplify this what is cosine of 7 pi over 6? I think 1/2 would be if it were sine, right? So instead of the half, it must be which? Must be the square root of 3 over 2, right? And then is it going to be a positive root 3 over 2 or a negative root 3 over 2, depending on where the 7 pi over 6 is? It's going to be negative. Good. Yeah, it's going to be a negative root 3 over 2. And then it'll be all over 2. And again, with these, I don't care if you simplify them at all. I just want to know that you can do it. Any questions on that one or the previous one? Let's do another one. Let's look at these last ones. All right. So I have sine of 7 pi over 8. So I want to use the half angle formula for sine. Okay. Again, what goes on the inside here. What do we do with what do we do with this number that's inside here? But when we plug it in over here, what do we do with this number? Multiply it by 2, right? Remember what's going inside the cosine is double what this number is. So what number is going to go inside the cosine function here that's under the radical? 7 pi over 4. Good. Remember that anytime we're doing this, we're doubling that. All right. So when we're using the half angle formula, when we take this number and plug it in here, all we're doing is multiplying it by 2. That's how we're getting that number on the inside. All right. So now we have to make a decision again on do we use the plus or do we use the minus? It's going to be the plus because what quadrant are we in over here with 7 pi over 8? 2. Good. We're over in quadrant 2. The reason I know that it's quadrant 2, this angle over here would be pi, which is 8 pi over 8, right? So 7 pi over 8 is just short. Would be over here. And we know that sine is positive in quadrant 2. The last thing we need is what cosine of 7 pi over 4 is. Since it's a pi over 4 angle, we're going to have what? It'd be, well, it won't be 1/2. It'd be 1 over root 2, right? And then 7 pi over 4 is down here, right, in quadrant 4, so it's positive. Cosine will be positive down there. So that will be our final answer. Questions on that one? Okay, how's this going to change for cosine? So one thing that'll change is that sign in the middle, right? For cosine, it's a plus on the inside. But remember, we still just double the angle when we plug it inside the cosine function. And now again, we have to make a decision. Are we going to use the plus or are we going to use the minus? There's going to be the minus in this case because, again, where is 7 pi over 8? Quadrant 2, right? It's over here. So we'll use the minus. And that's why I'm crossing it out in red. I'm trying to emphasize here that we have to make a choice. Is it the positive or is it the negative when we do this? And then we just, in the last part, we just did cosine of 7 pi over 4. So this will be negative square root of 1 plus 1 over root 2 over 2. Questions on this one at all? All right. Well, let's do an example like other ones that we've seen in the past. This one looks a lot like the problem we did before on Monday. All right, so we've got cosecant of alpha is negative 17 over 15, and alpha is between pi and 3 pi over 2. And this problem asks us to find the sine of alpha over 2 and cosine of alpha over 2. So just like we do any other time with these types of problems, we want to set up a triangle to help us get the answers that we need. Where am I going to draw this triangle? Which quadrant am I going to draw the triangle in? It'd be quadrant 3, right? Because we've got between pi and 3 pi over 2. So our triangle is going to go this way. And then what sides can we label? The hypotenuse is 17. And what other side can we label? The opposite, which is be negative 15. And then we can find the adjacent side using what? Yeah, the Pythagorean Theorem. Good. So we would have a squared plus negative 15 squared equals 17 squared. 15 squared is 225. So we get a squared is 64. When we do the square root of both sides, we get plus or minus 8. But given where the triangle is, which one do we want? Do we want the plus or the minus? The minus. Good, because we're over there in quadrant 3, right? So this will be negative 8. This is all stuff we've done before, right? Okay. All right. So let's go and figure out what these two values are, just like we've done in the past. So I want sine of alpha over 2. According to the formula, that's going to be plus or minus square root of 1 minus cosine of... Now again, what do we do with this angle? When we put it in for cosine, what do we do to it? Multiply by 2. So what's going to go inside the cosine here? Alpha. Good. So we get 1 minus cosine of alpha over 2. Now, this is probably the only tricky part to this problem, because we've done ones like this before. Same idea, right? We're using the triangle to help us get to this. But we need to figure out where alpha over 2 is, right? Remember, we have to decide which do we use as a positive or negative based on what quadrant alpha, the inside of this is. Where is quadrant this one is in? So let's go back up to this piece. If I have pi is less than alpha is less than 3 pi over 2, what's alpha over 2 have to be between?
Pi over 2 and 3 pi over 4.
Good. Pi over 2 and 3 pi over 4, right? So what quadrant would this be in then? What quadrant would alpha over 2 be in? If it's between pi over 2, which is here, right? Here's pi over 2, and 3 pi over 4, which would be over here. What quadrant are we talking about? It'd be quadrant 2. Good. Okay. So if we're in quadrant 2, then, if alpha over 2 is in quadrant 2, do we use the plus or the minus for the sign? It'll be the plus. Good. And now we're almost done with this problem. Like I said, that was the tricky part of this particular problem, is that we have to determine, are we using the plus or are we using the minus? So I had to go back over here, figure out where alpha was to help me figure out where alpha over 2 is. And now we're just about done, because this problem says, okay, we decided we use the plus. We wanted 1 minus cosine of alpha. What's cosine of alpha? Reading the triangle. If we look at the triangle, what's cosine of alpha? It would be the negative 8 over 17. Good. And it'd be all over 2. Let's do the second part here. So again, using our half angle formula, cosine of alpha over 2 is going to be plus or minus square root of 1 plus cosine of alpha over 2. Notice the similarities in the formulas, right? The only thing that's changing between sine of alpha over 2 and cosine of alpha over 2 is that sign that's in the middle of these two things. It's the only difference between the two formulas. Now, we've already established that alpha over 2 is in quadrant 2. So do we want to use the plus sign over in front or the minus sign in front? The minus sign, good. And again, this is coming from the fact that we're in quadrant 2 for alpha over 2. Okay. And then now we just need to fill in the rest of this because we already know what cosine of alpha is. We've already established that's negative 8 over 17. So we just need to plug that in to finish it off. We did all the hard work before we got to that point. Questions on that one?
Model.
Do you want to see another one like this one, or do you want to go practice some? I can post. I can also post a video that you can watch too, showing another one of these. Would that help? Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Can we work through one more?
Yeah, we can work through more and more. Sure, I can make up another one. Let's see here. All right, so let's say we had cotangent of alpha is, let's say, negative 24 over 7. And let's say we had 3 pi over 2 is less than alpha is less than 2 pi. And I ask you to find sine of alpha over 2 and cosine of alpha over 2. So first thing we want to do, just like when we attacked these problems in the past, first thing we want to do is get a triangle that represents what the situation is, right? So where am I going to draw my triangle? Quadrant 4, right? Because we're between 3 pi over 2 and 2 pi. So we'll draw our triangle down here. Since we're given information about the cotangent, what sides can we label? Okay. Yeah, the opposite and the adjacent. So the adjacent side is going to be the 24, right? Because cotangent is adjacent over opposite. And then the opposite side will be negative 7. We agree with that?
Yep.
Yeah? Okay. So we can figure out the hypotenuse then. So we'd have c squared is 24 squared plus negative 7 squared. If you go through all the arithmetic, you should get to c is 25.
Is it plus or minus?
It won't be plus or minus on that, because remember, we don't have to worry about plus or minus for this one because the hypotenuse is always going to be a plus. The only time we have to worry about pluses and minuses is when we're doing the adjacent and the opposite sides. The hypotenuse will always be a plus. All right, so for our formula then, our sine of alpha over 2 is plus or minus square root of 1 minus cosine of alpha over 2. Again, we have to make a decision on whether or not we use the plus or the minus. So that depends on what quadrant alpha over 2 is. Okay? So you always make a decision on the plus or the minus based on the inside of this thing. Okay? So over here, I have, write this at the bottom maybe. We have 3 pi over 2 is less than alpha is less than 2 pi. So what's that going to tell us about alpha over 2?
Between 3 pi over 4 and pi.
Good. Oops. Because you're just dividing everything by 2, right? So it'll be between 3 pi over 4 and pi. And in particular, what does that tell us what quadrant we're in for alpha over 2? It'd be in 2, right? Because 3 pi over 4 is here, and pi is here. So it's in quadrant 2. So since we're in quadrant 2, for sine, we use which one? We use the plus or the minus here? The plus. Good. All right. So almost done. What is, if going back over to the triangle now, what is cosine of alpha? Yeah, 24 over 25. So that one finishes off the sine of alpha over 2. For cosine of alpha over 2, same idea. Except that we have that plus sign. Oops. Got 2 there. We have that plus sign in the middle. We still need to make a decision on our sign in front, if it's a positive or negative. We've already established that alpha over 2 is in quadrant 2. So do we use the plus or the minus?
Minus.
The minus, good. And now we've already established that cosine of alpha is 24 over 25. So notice that we start this problem in the same way we've started problems just like it in the past, right? Get our triangle drawn based on the situation. We're just using our new formula to help us calculate this particular value. And again, like I said, I think the trickiest part of this type of problem is trying to figure out which quadrant you're in based on the information. I think that's the hardest part of the whole thing. Questions on this one?
So on the like the sine pi over 2, we said we multiply that by 2 or divide the whole thing.
From here to here, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we all the whatever's inside here, you're gonna double it to get to here. Yeah, always multiply by 2 to get in there. So notice that we did that here, and we did that back up here when we were doing these, right? We took the 15 and made it 30, took the 7 pi over 12 and made it 7 pi over 6, and so on. Any other questions at all? All right, so like I said, at 11 o'clock, you should get access to your take-home quiz. It's due at 5 o'clock on Friday. I will be on here on Zoom at 10 o'clock like usual for class, but again, I'm going to treat it like an office hour almost. It'd be where you have time to come ask questions. And then, of course, you can always set up something with me in another time or ask me questions through email. Happy to do any of those things. Just let me know. I can also I'll post a video as well doing a couple more of these. I'll do that this afternoon. I'll get a video posted with a couple of more of these with the half angle formula so you can see how they work. And hopefully that'll help you get through the take-home quiz. Any other questions at all before we say goodbye? No? All right. Well, everybody have a good day.